All right, and welcome back to Humans in the Loop. It's myself, Sharon, and Nick, and we are here to invite you, our favorite humans, in the loop with all things AI. And here we are, our first one for 2025.
Yeah, quite a week. We're probably going to be posting this next week, but quite a week last week was with all the DeepSeek news, huh?
Yeah, I was going to say, we kind of picked an auspicious week for us to pop back up and have our first real dialogue about everything that's happening. So let's get into it. Let's dive into it, pun intended. So tell me about your thoughts with DeepSeek.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's a lot of sovereign nation state, AI kind of conversation. We're going to steer this conversation a little bit different direction. I would say that, of course, your own company's governance very much that's a very personal thing for you to decide whether or not this is a model you would want to use or not. But I think that the bigger implications here are what we're learning from it, right? It's been open sourced. You see how they got to the answers. And what we're seeing is a much more efficient model, which I think is encouraging because that's going to bring so many new use cases to bear and new ways to do things, and it's going to be great for organizations and for users.
Yeah, I mean, so talking from my own experience as someone that uses a breadth of models constantly. I mean, I can tell you, I experimented a lot with V3, experimented a lot with R1, and R1 is really powerful, right? It's a pretty performant model. I would say it does not edge out O1, and it does not edge out the new Gemini thinking model, personally, from my experience, but it gets pretty darn close, right? And I think what makes it particularly compelling as a story is having that permissive MIT license makes it, right in the hands of any enterprise that wants to pick it up and start experimenting with it. Now, obviously, to your point, organizations have to balance whether or not, we're not going to be talking about the geopolitical implications of the model, in this particular, podcast, but an organization is going to have to balance that. Whether or not they're going to want to POC something, that's going to be up to their own decisions. Obviously, you're going to want to, consider things like, if I'm going to POC, am I going to use data that, what data am I going to use? Or like, what are the considerations you're going to make on that, front? But the thing that it does, which I find, is very compelling about the story, is makes a lot of use cases a lot more within reach because it puts a very, very powerful model in the hands of enterprises.
And I think the interesting thing here is, people were thinking we would hit a wall, we would hit a plateau. Elon Musk famously said that we've run out of data to train these models on. I would actually posit that there's a incredible source of data that hasn't been trained on in these models, and that's typically a company's data. And I think what you're seeing is, as we see these models get more and more commoditized, what you're going to see is that it's the business model and it's the data that will become the differentiators. And that's something you want to protect, obviously. So, I mean, it's really going to favor organizations developing their own models or leveraging these models and augmenting with their data and their business processes. But that's really exciting to see. And I think another group that it's going to probably win out of this is the ISVs, the software vendors. You're going to start seeing these folks have a very good understanding of a workflow because they've basically built it into the product, and the data is typically a byproduct of that workflow, and so therefore it's very structured. They understand how it can be used. So I think that that's going to be really key. And the nice part about this is that for these ISVs, a lot of them, there's a whole thing about $1 trillion cloud paradox that Andreessen Horowitz talked about, which effectively was that 50% of their revenue was going to paying their cloud costs.
Yeah.
Obviously, inferencing is very expensive. Now, the encouraging thing about this is DeepSeek is really lowering the cost of inferencing here, but it's also going to allow you to create smaller models which can live on a device. So this could be a very attractive way for these software vendors to deliver a model locally onto a device, give the customer privacy, give them offline usage, and give yourself a free inferencing tool.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be very curious to know if folks are able to run R1 on device and what that experience is. You brought up Mark Andreessen a second ago, or Andreessen Horowitz, and I actually thought he had a really interesting comment about this being AI's Sputnik moment. And I think that's a really interesting way to frame it because regardless of whether or not organizations end up eagerly embracing DeepSeek, can't speak today. Um, I think what's important is that this kind of ignites a new inflection point for AI because now the other, hint, hint, Meta, open model providers are going to kind of have to sit up and pay attention and say, what's my play?
Yeah.
Because another point that I was going to make a second ago is another winner in this hand, I think, are individual users, so consumers such as myself, right? Because going back in time to say September of last year when O1 came out, the people that had access to that kind of best in class reasoning model were your paying customers. So the folks that were kind of shilling out $20 a month for ChatGPT. And around that same time, you had OpenAI talking about, hey, you know what, you want the best in show from us, you may have to pony up $200. And that's what we saw, around December. That was like, they were rolling out the pro, package for $200 a month. And, a development like this is showing that, your average everyday consumer could potentially get access to a pretty performant reasoning model for $0.
But while we're talking about this is all really great for users, good for companies. Obviously, there was an elephant in the room, which was Wall Street,
Mm-hmm.
and you saw some of these companies just get really whacked by this new advancement. But was it Jevons paradox?
That's correct.
Jevons paradox. So the interesting thing is, I thought from the very beginning, I thought this is just going to mean more AI in more places, everywhere, faster. And so for me, it was I thought like maybe investors are doing the wrong thing here because they're jumping ship and they're saying, oh, this means that no one's going to need these GPUs anymore. And it's like I think it's exactly the opposite. Is the more value something has and the cheaper it is to do, that means that hey, we can go out and we can go and invest and we can solve more use cases. And what I'm telling customers right now is hey, you get your data pipeline ready, you do the data prep, you figure out all your business processes, you get all that stuff set up. And that means that sometimes these models can be a little bit of a hot swappable, right? So if you got all that stuff done, as it advances, you can drop in, a new model. And the cool thing about that is it's kind of investment protection. Is isn't it nice where instead of having to buy more hardware later for the next use case, if it gets more efficient, now all of a sudden I create headroom for the next workload. That's great.
Yeah. So any concluding thoughts from you?
I think everything's moving so fast as always. We keep telling people, don't wait, just keep going. Get going today because it's cooking, right? It's very interesting to see where this is going, open versus closed models. I'm team open, obviously. So, but I think we're going to continue to see these kinds of advancements, and it'll be really incredible to see, where we're going. And the last thing is, these companies are spending $100 billion. They're building something different, guys. They're building AGI, and they need to build AGI because if you are selling a subscription to something, you need to be able to answer any question under the sun, pretty much, because you don't know what those use cases are going to be. But when you're building something, say as an organization, you know very clearly what those use cases are, and that favors more this open approach where you're going to build a narrower, smaller model that's more targeted. So I think that's kind of where I see the market going.
Yeah, and I would add to that and say different models for different things, right? So I could not agree with you more. I would say, as you know, I'm a big fan of OpenAI, and often strongly stump for the models that they're releasing and a lot of the products. But with that said, I'm a big fan and a big believer in the open ecosystem, and I could not be more excited about what this potentially portends for the year ahead. And I would just like to kind of throw out the enthusiasm and the inspiration to Meta. I'm like, hey man, this is your moment, right? Like I've been saying for some time, like I'm looking forward to a reasoner from Meta this year. So like gloves are off. Like come at us. Like let's see what they've got.
Great.
That's my moment.
All right. So as always, thanks for joining us on Humans in the Loop.
And yeah, we'll see you soon.
All right.